Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Web Security 2021 Updates and Implementations. My name is Justin Kurpius, and I'm a go-to-market specialist from AWS, located in the Chicago area. And I am joined by Diana Alvarado, who is a senior technical account manager, and she joins us from the UK. In this session, we're going to cover most of the 2021 updates to our AWS WAF, our feature updates. Then we'll segue into common architectures in which these new features can be implemented. Then I'll hand it over to Diana so that she can go through a demo showcasing the features. And then Diana will take us through the key takeaways. So again, from a high level, we're going to discuss the features. We'll talk about the architectures in which these features can be implemented. Then Diana will show you the features via a demo along with some key takeaways. But before we jump in, I do want to call out that this is a 300 level session and it's not a review session. So we're going to dive right into WAF, or AWS WAF, and some of the features that we've launched. So we do expect that everybody in this session will have a good understanding and familiarity with AWS WAF and some of our other edge services like Shield Advanced, CloudFront, etc. So if you do not have this detailed understanding, it's okay. You'll get a good feel for the direction we're taking AWS WAF. And again, you can sponge this up, take this info in, and then go look at some of the collateral, and Diana will hit on this later in the session. But you can bring the pieces together from taking this information we'll go over today and implementing it into some of your learnings from some of the collateral and white papers. So this really, there's a few takeaways here, and this slide shows the 2021 main features that we launched in AWS WAF. And I say main features because we had a few other kind of smaller, minor launches, but these are some of the main highly requested features from customers. But before I talk about this, if we just kind of take a step back and go back a few years, for most of you that are in this session, you've probably been using WAF for a while. Or you're familiar with the kind of lineage of WAF, you'll know that in 2019, and actually at reInvent 2019, which seems forever ago, we overhauled AWS WAF. So we came out with a new API that made it easier to work with WAF and customize WAF, and we also launched our new AWS managed rules. So if you take a kind of a high level view of this, we built WAF initially for builders, right? And it was full customization. We wanted to give our customers the tools in which they can make their own rules as it pertained to their environment. But over the years, we've listened to customers, and some customers have wanted more of an out-of-box experience. So the launch in 2019 was basically exactly that, right? Doing our AWS managed rules and really taking it in a new direction so that if customers want to build, they can build. And then if some customers want us to manage parts of it, we can do that. So that segues into, 2019, we launched that. 2020, we continued to iterate on some of the managed rules. And then now what you're seeing in 2021, it's a mixture, right? So we have some more tools to customize, and we now have bot control, which we'll cover, which is a managed rule. So hopefully the key takeaway here is, big picture, we continue to innovate with AWS WAF. So I'm going to cover, in this session, we're going to cover these features you see on this slide. So I'm going to cover them from a high level, and then Diana, as I discussed, will do the demo on these features. So starting with JSON body validation and parsing. Now this is key for customers that are looking to protect APIs. And so really what this allows our customers to do is to really validate the JSON structure of incoming requests. So, but with that, we give the customization or the agility for customers to decide what they want to validate, right? It could be all of the request, or it could be just parts of that request by using our JSON pointer syntax, which allows our customers to focus in on keys and values to help minimize false positives. Another feature is custom response. And so you might hear me say this was a highly requested feature from our customers a few times, right? So the key takeaway here is we are focusing on the features that we get a lot of requests from customers as we continue to build our WAF out, and this being one of them. So now we have the ability for our customers to use custom response, and it can be used as in association with an action that is matched in a rule. And so rather than just having the ability to do 403 response, now you can respond. You can have a custom response with whatever, whether it's a 300, 200 level response. Also, it gives you the ability to do a custom response from the aspect of being able to put custom text to tell the user that has been blocked, maybe why they're blocked. Maybe if it was someone internal, they're going somewhere they shouldn't, it can respond and tell them exactly why they shouldn't be accessing or can't access the application that they're trying to get to. Another feature is header insertion. And so I try to explain this in two areas, in two sections. The first of which being, this really gives our customers the agility as they build out their rules to insert a custom header into the incoming request so that they can do different types of processing downstream in the rule chain. So customers can essentially make sure that request is added make sure that the custom header is added once the request comes in, and then as the request goes through the rules, then a rule down below can take into consideration the custom header that was added up above for more flexibility in how to write on writing the rules and how to further zero in on specific ways to block or do a custom response to that request. Also, the second piece of this, and a different way to think about it, is thinking about it from a validation perspective. So this allows our customers to utilize that custom or that inserted header into the request so that the application can say, I'll only accept requests that have that custom header included. Now on to AWS WAF bot control. So we were really excited about this launch, and this was, again, one of those top requested features from customers. But so what is AWS WAF bot control? Well, you can think about it first, it's a AWS managed rule within AWS WAF, right? So for those of you that are already using AWS managed rules, you will now, when you go in, you'll see AWS WAF bot control as another rule. And so what it does is it focuses on the common and pervasive bots. And when I say common and pervasive bots, I'm talking about the scrapers, the crawlers, the spammers that just come in waves, right? So that come in like high frequency, a big quantity. And so what we hear from customers is it just takes a team of many individuals to try to combat these types of common and pervasive bots. And so we've listened to our customers and we've integrated it as a managed rule so that we can help you filter those requests at the edge. Now, as we were building this, we were looking at the data and we found that 51% of traffic coming through our AWS WAF were flagged by this AWS WAF bot control managed rule. So what that tells us is we can really help you identify that traffic at the edge, so that then you can start deciding what you want to do with that traffic. And I say that because some bots are actually good bots. So if your business strives on needing bots that scrape maybe prices, for example, it could be Microsoft or Google's bots that pull the pricing and pull data into their search engine, then you want to let that through. So we can help you understand of those bots which is good, and then you can identify that and then let that through, and then of course which you don't want on your platforms, and then you can block. So really, if we take a step back, we allow you to decide and hopefully save time, effort, and money by just blocking it at the edge and then focusing on more advanced bots and that other 49% of the traffic after it gets through the first rule or at the edge. Another feature we launched right about the time we launched bot control is labels. And so labels is actually very important for AWS WAF bot control, but it's also important for our other managed rules. So labels, essentially, you can think of it as a tag that we assign to each request that is matched with a managed rule. And so if you think about it from a managed rule perspective, our managed rules have a number of different kind of rules within the overall rule that we want to show you visibility into exactly the details of that AWS managed rule, why it was matched, and what is that, right? So you can then take a look at that and the naming convention of that, and then apply different rules from what you learn later on in the rule stack. And that's really what labels allows you to do. So if a request comes in and is matched by a subset of a rule for ABC, let's say, then you can take that, what you learned in that label, and create a different rule on down the rule set or the rule stack, in which you can either maybe block, maybe monitor, or do a custom response to that request. So it allows you to have agility with your rule sets. It also allows you to have better visibility in your logs to get a feel for how many requests you are getting with that specific tag, rather than the overall request and rule match from the managed rule itself. Log filtering is another feature that we launched, again, requested a lot by all of you and our customers. And this one really focuses on saving costs. And so with any kind of firewall type service, you get a lot of requests. There's a lot of activity going on. And so if you have to log all of that, cost can add up and space can add up. So this gives you the ability to choose what you would like to log. And you can do that per rule. You can have a lot of flexibility on choosing what to log. You can also redact fields as you set it up in the custom settings of this feature. So this really helps customers, some that just don't have to log everything, and so they can go through, save money that way. Or for customers that may have mandates coming down where if they're logging data and logs, they have to redact fields of maybe sensitive information. Versioning is a feature that allows our customers more control when it comes to our managed rules. So as discussed, we've launched our managed rules in 2019, did work on them in 2020. And so as we do that, and as we add to our add specific features and expand upon our managed rules, our customers were looking for the ability to decide and choose the version that they want updated live in their environment. And so before launching this, we would just update the versions of our managed rules, and then it would just go live, right? So now we give you the ability to enable versioning and choose the managed rule that you would like to use in production. And so this gives you the ability to run some of the new versions of our managed rules in staging and test that first before launching in production. And we say this is for AWS managed rules because any customized rules that you create, you can actually, as you create those rules, you can just copy and paste exactly what was in those rules via JSON and save that. And so that is the way our customers version the non-managed rules. So this in particular would be for managed rules. Now I'm going to segue into common architectures. And so we want to talk about this in two ways. The first way being all of the features that we've identified and that we've covered today can just be added to WAF, which in return means you can just add it into your current architectures that you're using today. There's really no architecture change that has to be made. And also, we want to look at this from the standpoint of this is the architecture that can be assumed with the demo that Diana is doing here in a few minutes. So, but also, this architecture is typically what we recommend for customers. From a high level, right? There might be some minor fine tuning, and it's what a lot of our customers are using. So let's just go over it real quick. You have our Route 53 for DNS. Then we have CloudFront at the edge, in which we can apply WAF that integrates directly with CloudFront. Also, Shield Advanced, because Shield Advanced as a DDoS layer 3 and layer 4 works very well with WAF. And then you would have your requests coming through. Either you can take it to the ALB or you can take it directly to the S3 bucket. Now, this gives flexibility. So you can also go directly into an ALB with WAF on that ALB, not needing CloudFront. So you can see that here. Now, we do recommend using CloudFront at the edge, but again, everybody's situation is different. But we have, and Diana will point to it, but we have a really good white paper that talks about DDoS resiliency and really goes into detail on this architecture. So that's for web applications. Now, we also have one for API-focused customers, which, as you'll see, is very similar to the previous one, only we insert our API gateway. So you have Route 53 for DNS. We come in at the edge with CloudFront and with AWS WAF and Shield Advanced integrated with CloudFront. And then we can take that request then into the API gateway, which would then take it to the resource. So, and again, flexibility, you can take it directly into API gateway that has WAF integrated, and then to the resource. So again, we recommend CloudFront at the edge, but everybody's situation is different. So throughout this demo that you'll see, and just kind of a call out, and most everybody in here is aware of these tools, but what you'll see in the demo is Diana will sometimes, for some instances, she'll use the visual rule builder to show you how some of these features tie in. And then she'll also show and use the JSON code in the rule builder as well. So we want to call this out because we give you flexibility, right? The visual rule builder helps guide you to create correct rules and gives you some flexibility. But if you're looking to create nested rules and really the more advanced rule creation, you would be able to do that in JSON and have more flexibility than you would the visual rule builder. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Diana to do the demo.
Hi everyone, my name is Diana and I'll be taking you through the demo. I'll be using the features that Justin mentioned and we'll be using them by themselves or in combination to show how you can enhance an existing WAF configuration or just create new rules.
Let's start with a basic WAF configuration, something similar to what I'm showing that you might be using. So if we start with something like an IP allowed list and an IP block list, I would give you an option to quickly add or remove an IP that might be being allowed or blocked. So this can be used across different web ACLs, across your applications, and makes it easier to enforce these types of changes. The blanket rate rule will give you visibility across your site for HTTP request velocity. So any IPs that are misbehaving across your site and on a high threshold, then you can quickly block them with this. This is part of some best practices that we recommend for rate rules. And we have a blog post that expands on this, and I'll be linking that in the resource section at the end. Then we have the Amazon IP reputation list and the anonymous IP list, and that will provide some information and intelligence about the IPs that are hitting your site. And at the end, we have the Amazon Managed Rules, or the AMR, for reviewing the request itself. So if we start from this basic configuration and we have some of these rules in comp mode, then we can go into our logs and do a log analysis and identify which rules need to be tuned or how I can add custom rules to improve the security of my site just based on what I'm seeing on my traffic and my logs. So some of the use cases that we'll go through are very common use cases where the new features can help. So we'll go into first use case, and this would be for an API. For my site, I have web traffic and I have API traffic, as we saw in the common architectures that Justin mentioned. So if we take the API as a starting point and I want to validate a value that is being sent in the request body, then I can create a custom rule to do just that. So let's go into these rules and do my own rule. I'll use the visual rule builder for this one. And this one I'm going to call API key or API value. And it would be a regular rule. And what I'm going to match this rule on would be my URI path for my API. And then I will also match the rule with the request body. So I will match the URI path and it would be an exact match. And in this case, it would be /API. But then I'm also going to add an inspection of the body. And once I select the inspection of the body, then I get the option to move the content type to JSON. And then I can scope it to reviewing all the keys or maybe just specific values. So in this case, I'll focus on one value only. And then I can decide what WAF does if the request body is invalid. And in this case, I want it to match so that it's denied. I can inspect the full JSON content, or I can also inspect just only elements that I want, which is what I'm going to focus on. In this case, I'll check an element called name. And the match type for this, I will use a regex. So now you're able to add a specific inline regex into a rule Specifically, if the regex will be only applied for this rule, if you're sharing the regex with other rules, then it might be more useful to create it as a regex set within the WAF service. So for this one, I'll just do a regular basic expression of allowing only letters for this. So no special characters and no numbers. But again, you can specify whatever type of inspection that you want for this particular element. And then I'm going to say that if it doesn't match this, then it needs to be blocked. So I have to negate this statement. So if it's going to my API endpoint and it doesn't match the regex for the name element, then I'll block it. And I can add this rule. I can set the rule right after my basic rules and hit save. And what I'm going to do now is run a request through an HTTP client so that you can see the response from WAF. Okay, so if I bring in any HTTP client that you're familiar with, and I have my CloudFront application on the path that I configured, and I will send a body with an element that doesn't meet the regex that I configured. So I'm going to post this, and then you can see the response from WAF. What we'll do now is modify this response. So if you have a native app and you need this response to be different than 403, then you can customize this in the rule. So if we go back to the rule and we scroll all the way down, once you select the rule action to block, then you can customize this response here. I will enable the response code. And there are some supported response codes, and that is in our documentation. For this one, I'll use a 400 BAT request. And you can also add response header and body to add even more information to the response itself. So in this case, I will say I want to send a header called source and the name WAF. You can decide any header that you want. And then I'll just save the rule. I'll leave it as it is. And then I'll run the request again. So we'll run the same request that we did before. And when we send the request, we can see a 400 BAT request. And we can see the response header that we configured. If we go back to our config and we think about other options of using headers for request information, and if we look at our logs and we see activity around our very sensitive URIs like the logging or the signing endpoints, then we can think about additional checks that can be performed on some of these requests. So if they're being flagged by Amazon IP reputation list or anonymous IP list, but you want to get further information about the request before blocking it, you can add a header, send that to the backend, run additional checks, and then decide whether to block the request or not. So let's do a rule that does something like that. We'll add a rule, but we'll use the JSON editor. And I already previewed this rule. It will be a nested rule, so I'll remove the sample code and add my own code. I'll validate the code. Again, you can use a JSON validator for this, especially for the format. And my rule will be named IP header review. I will insert a header named review, and the value would be true if there is a combination of criteria that is met. First one would be that the URI path is the login path. And then I'll have an OR statement. So the request needs to go to the login and either have a anonymous IP list label or a hosting provider IP list label, which means that it has match on these particular rules in my web ACL. You can add as many labels as you want in here, and your criteria might be different. Once I send this request with the header to the backend can have many different forms. It could be a server running third-party checks. It could be a Lambda function, cross-referencing information across AWS services. So you can decide how to enrich that information and decide what to do with the request. So I'll add the rule, and I'll actually move this rule right below the anonymous IP list. So I'll move it up. It has to go through this first to possibly get the label, and the rules would need to be in comp mode. And then do save. Okay, so we've seen how we can use headers in the responses as well as for evaluating a request and sending it downstream for further processing. We can also combine those with labels. In this case, we did it with the IP reputation list. But we can also use labels for AMR for creating exceptions to rules. So it is common that you would see rules flag for parameters or headers that are actually valid for your application. So an exception can buy you time to go and fix the formatting issue or the application issue and not be blocking requests. So let's do a custom rule in here. And we'll consider a cross-site scripting rule that it's creating a false positive on a cookie. So we'll use two different criteria for this. And again, you can combine as many criteria as it applies to your request. Ideally, you would do a log review, identify the matching string, and then add it into the exception. So I'll do an N. The first would be on my header, my cookie header. My match type ideally would be exact, or it could be a regex if that's what you're using. And I would say something like this as an example. And the other criteria is that it has a label. It has already been flagged by the cross-site scripting rule. So when I select the label, you can see all the labels that the manage rules generate. And if I can filter by the cookie, I can see the cross-site scripting cookie in here. I select the label, and I have to negate the statement at the top. So if the cookie does not match this exact string and it has a label for cross-site scripting, then I will block the request. And then I can add my rule. And I can add this right below the AMR. Again, the manage rules, we need to run through the request first so that request gets the label, and then I can block it. I want to go into my manage rules just to make sure that that particular cross-site scripting rule is in comp mode. Otherwise, when it matches, it would just block it from there before getting to the custom rule. So let's click on the manage rules and click on edit. We'll scroll down to the cross-site scripting rule, and it is in count mode. If it's not, you can move it to count. Another good thing to consider here is that you do have versions of the manage rules now. If you click on here, you can see the different versions that are available. If you're on the default, then you will always have the latest. But if you want more control over the versions, then you can decide to evaluate them before activating the version. Now, if you're getting false positives and you're in an all version, what you can also consider is evaluating new versions and see if those false positives remediate. And then if they don't, you can add a custom rule. So I would just leave it at default. Scroll down and save the rule. I'll leave it where it is, and then I'll save here. We've been able to do all of this without using bot controls rules yet. So let's start considering some of the intelligence that bot control can bring into the WAF and your specific web ACL. If we go into the bot control tab, you scroll down, you can see some of the requests and bot activity even without having the rules. I don't have a lot of activity on this particular one since it's the demo one I'm building. But if you already have an active web ACL, you'll be able to see some data in here. And the data will actually help you identify the categories that might be hitting your site and the areas where you should focus, and whether activating the bot rules will be of benefit for your web ACL. So I will add bot control in here. I would set it to count mode. There's a lot of categories that we have, some documentation that would help you learn a bit more about them. All of these will have labels as well. And then you can use a scope down statement. The scope down statement would allow you to specify where you want to apply the bot control rules. You might not want to apply them to all of the site, maybe just a specific query parameter or a URI path or a specific method like a post. Scoping down bot control will help you save on cost as well. So that is always a good consideration. I won't be using a scope down statement for demo purposes. So I'll save the rule and I'll save this rule as well. So if we combine these bot rules into some of the other intelligence that we've been building, we can think about a use case where a signal from bot control can help you simplify your application and provide additional intelligence as well. So let's consider a specific use case where a single page application needs to provide a fully rendered site to a search engine. Now you might already build this from your application logic, but you can simplify it by moving it into WAF using some of the bot control rules. So if I do a single page application in here, what I will do is match on a search engine label. So there's a couple that could be useful. You can examine the bot control documentation and decide which one fits best. In my specific case, I will use a label for SEO. So there's a category called SEO and another label for search engines. So this could be an or, it could be an or. I'll actually change it to an or. And then I'll say if it's a search engine or an SEO bot, then what I want to do is count the requests and I will add a header. And this header again will help me send the processing downstream to my app. So I would say SEO true. You can add any header that you want. WAF would just add a prefix of X Amazon WAF so that you consider that when you're processing it in the backend. And then if I send this to my backend, and my backend can be anything from a specific server, a third-party service, a Lambda function that will read this header and provide a pre-rendered site to the bot. Since I'm using CloudFront from my app, I can use Lambda at Edge, create a Lambda function, and on the origin request, return the fully rendered site to the bot. I'll add my rule here. And again, this needs to run after bot control so that it applies the search engine labels to the request and then it can be processed. I'll save this. Now, if we combine these rules that we're creating with bot control with some of the other existing functionality from WAF, such as rate controls, you can enhance the way that you look at signals and requests from the edge perspective. So let's think about a situation where you have a sensitive endpoint like the sign up endpoint, and you want to combine a rate control with labels. So let's create a custom rule. And for this, again, we'll use a nested rule. So we'll go into the JSON editor. I'll remove the sample code since I previewed my rule. I'll validate the rule. It's valid. And then my rule is called sign up. And what I will be doing is using a rate control. And the rate control will look at my URI, the sign up URI, on an exact match. And then it will combine a couple of signals. One would be from the anonymous IP list, and the other one would be from bot control, specifically the non-browser user agent. So that way, if I'm running the request through WAF and it's hitting on anonymous IP and it's a non-browser user agent, but it's going to my sign up, then I can block the request. So it's no longer only about the number of requests that I'm meeting. In this case, I have a rate rule of 200. So all of these signals together give more confidence in the block than just a simple rate rule. I'm also using the X-forwarded for IP in this case instead of the source IP in the request. So I'll add the rule. And again, this rule will have to go after the anonymous IP, and bot control, so that if it's going through those specific labels, then I can block the request. If any of the other rules picks up on that request before it gets to this, then it might not be matching on this one. But at least if it's missing all of the others, this one will pick it up at the end. We'll save. A couple of final considerations. One is if you have a request that runs through WAF and in the end is allowed with a default WebACL of allow, you can still add a custom header for visibility or further processing. So if you edit the default action, you can add a custom header in here to just signal downstream that this was evaluated by WAF. So evaluated, it could be true or WAF. This will help with any investigations that you might need to conduct for suspicious activity. The other consideration is on logs, since we're mentioning logs. So you can enable login, and now you can filter the logs that you want to keep. If I enable my logs and I select the Kinesis Firehose stream, I can redact fields from my logs, but I can also add a filter. In this case, I can filter on a rule action or a rule label. It could be an Amazon label, or it could be a custom label that you create. And in the end, you can decide what you keep and what you drop from the logs. This will also help save on cost for storage of logs. I'll cancel this and go back to my rules. So we've seen some basic ways in which you can use the visibility and the logs to improve and fine-tune WAF with the new features, so that you can use the specific signals and custom rules to improve the overall security of your WAF configuration. Now, let's go back and summarize a few key takeaways that we need to consider from this demo.
So for our key takeaways, analyze your traffic and evaluate possible solutions. Take a look at your logs and find what suits your needs best. There isn't a one size fits all for WAF, so it's always worth to look at the logs and analyze. 2, review what you have and consider an update. WAF has changed a lot in the last 2 years or even in the last 2 months. So it's always worth to check the new features and see if they will simplify your configuration. And number 3, new and already integrated features can simplify management. We saw how you can integrate WAF into your application pipeline and use it downstream to simplify the way that you code and the way that you manage your application. So it's always worth to review the way that you're building and see if you can take advantage of edge services. There's some resources in here as well, some relevant resources that might help, and also some useful sessions as part of reInvent. I hope this was helpful and that you're willing to try out these new features. Thank you for your time.